Bhagavatam class on Tuesday the 24th of August. Hare Kṛṣṇa everybody. Just start by chanting the Jayadratha Madhava. Jayadratha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayadratha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 15. The Pandavas retire timely. Text 17. Sauchevrita kumati namada ishvaro me yatpada padmana bhavaya bhajanti bhavya mam shantava marayoratino bhuristam na praharanyarανubhava nirasta citta Sauchevrita kumati natmada ishvaro me yatpada padmana bhavaya bhajanti bhavya mam shantavaha marayoratino bhuristam na praharanyarανubhava nirasta citta Sauchevrita Kumatinamada Ishvaro me Yat pada padmana bhavaya bhajanti bhavya Mam shrantava marayorati no bhuvistam Na praharan yadanubhava nirasta chitta Jayadratha Kumatinamada Ishvaro me Yat pada padmana bhavaya bhajanti bhavya Mam shrantava marayorati no bhuvistam Na praharan yadanubhava nirasta chitta. Jay, regarding a chariot driver, Vrita, engaged, Kumatina, by bad consciousness, Atmada, one who delivers, Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, me, my, Yat, whose, Pada Padmam, lotus feet, Abhavaya, in the matter of salvation, Bhajanti, do render service, Bhavya, the intelligent class of men, Mam, unto me, Shranta, thirsty, Vaham, my horses, Araya, the enemies, Ratina, a great general, Bhuvistam, while standing on the ground, Na, did not, Praharan, attack, Yat, whose, Anubhava, mercy, Nirasta, being absent, Chitta, mind. Translation. It was by his mercy only that my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from my chariot to get water for my thirsty horses. And it was due to my lack of esteem for my Lord that I dared engage him as my chariot driver, for he is worshipped and offered services by the best men to attain salvation. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, Sri Kṛṣṇa, is the object of worship both by impersonalists and by the devotees of the Lord. The impersonalists worship his glowing effulgence emanating from his transcendental body of eternal form, bliss and knowledge. And the devotees worship him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Those who are below even the impersonalists consider him to be one of the great historical personalities. The Lord, however, descends to attract all by his specific transcendental pastimes, and thus he plays the part of the most perfect master, friend, son, and lover. His transcendental relation with Arjuna was in friendship, and the Lord therefore played the part perfectly, as he did with his parents, lovers, and wives. While playing in such a perfect transcendental relation, the devotee forgets, by the internal potency of the Lord, that his friend or son is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although sometimes the devotee is bewildered by the acts of the Lord. After the departure of the Lord, Arjuna was conscious of his great friend, but there was no mistake on the part of Arjuna, nor any ill estimation of the Lord. Intelligent men are attracted by the transcendental acting of the Lord with a pure, unalloyed devotee like Arjuna. In the warfield, scarcity of water is a well-known fact. Water is very rare there, and both the animals and men working strenuously on the warfield constantly require water to quench their thirst. Especially wounded soldiers and generals feel very thirsty at the time of death. And it sometimes so happens that simply for want of water, one has to die unavoidably. But such scarcity of water was solved in the Battle of Kurukshetra by means of boring the ground. By God's grace, water can be easily obtained from any place if there is facility for boring the ground. The modern system works on the same principle of boring the ground, but modern engineers are still unable to dig immediately wherever necessary. It appears, however, from the history as far back as the days of the Pandavas, that big generals like Arjuna could at once supply water even to the horses, and what to speak of men, by drawing water from underneath the hard ground simply by penetrating the stratum with a sharp arrow, a method still unknown to the modern scientists. And the translation again. It was by his mercy only that my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from my chariot to get water for my thirsty horses. And it was due to my lack of esteem for my Lord that I dared engage him as my chariot driver, for he worshipped and offered services, for he is worshipped and offered services by the best men to attain salvation. Om Ajana Timarandasya Gunanjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Putale Swayarupa Gadamayam Dadati Swabadantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. The verse today and purport reflect on the different rasas or relationships that we can have with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, the most beautiful, all-attractive person. First thing to maybe consider in the context of that, as we talk many times, on this planet alone, there are somewhere pushing 7.5 billion human beings, what to speak of all the other living entities in the form of animals and birds and aquatics and insects, etc., etc. So there's like trillions and trillions of living entities on this planet alone. And that's before you consider all the other planets in all the multiple universes. So the first thing to bear in mind, I guess, is that, as we've talked many times, the Lord Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, is unlimited. And therefore, for us, for instance, having relationships with multiple people can be a challenge, particularly the bigger that group expands to just remembering everybody, and remembering, their names and birthdays and all of those kind of things. So, once you go into double figures and beyond triple figures of relationships, it can become very, very challenging to keep on top of it all. You have to have a really well organized diary. But there's no such limitation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Lord Krishna can have relationships with unlimited amounts of people, and does have relationships with all living entities. So that's the first thing just to consider. There's a beautiful description in Kṛṣṇa book, actually, when Kṛṣṇa is leaving Dwarka. And as he's leaving Dwarka, he of course has 16,108 wives in Dwarka, and each of them have their own palace. So he leaves all those palaces simultaneously, and then as he gets to the gates of Dwarka, kind of merges into just one Kṛṣṇa and leaves. But having those relationships of the 16,108 wives, with his wives, 16,108 of them, it's no issue for Kṛṣṇa. It's just no issue. He's like totally able to do that. And as I say, that's just 16,000, what to speak of beyond that. But there's just no skin off Kṛṣṇa's nose, as the phrase goes, like that. But it's just perfectly normal, natural, no stress, no pressure. So Kṛṣṇa has that capability. So then the relationships that we have with Kṛṣṇa, all the different living entities. So basically they're broken into 5 different categories. The first one is known as Shanta Ras. Shanta, and then Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. So they're the 5 rasas. So Santa Ras, the first one, actually Prabhupada talks a lot, and we'll talk a little bit about that. He's talking about impersonalism and impersonalists in the purport also. So Shanta Ras, the first one, it's kind of the closest that you'll get to the impersonal relationship that one can have with Krishna. Yeah, I should say those 5 categories, those that I listed, Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Madhurya, and Vatsalya, they're 5 categories, broad categories of personal relationships that you can have with Krishna. Then there's also the impersonal category. So Shanta is the closest that you can get to the impersonal categories, if you like. And I guess one of the nice ways to describe it, or good ways for me at least to understand it, is that it's kind of like an observing relationship where you're just effectively observing. A little bit like, some personalities on this planet. I would not include myself in this. They like a thing called window shopping, where people go into a city and they literally just walk around the windows of shops and look in the windows and window shop like that. They don't actually go inside. So the Santa Ras is a little bit like that you're kind of having a role of just observing. You're not directly engaging in the relationship, you're just observing it like that. So that's the first relationship, or rasa, in the category of personal relationships, whereas one of observance. And then the next one is dasya. Das, of course, means servant, so it's a relationship of being a servant, like a master-servant type relationship like that. Which ultimately actually underpins all relationship with Krishna, because Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, therefore we are all subservient to Krishna. But that specifically, though, in a specific relationship is one of that role of master-servant, like that. The next one is Sakya, and that's the one that Arjuna falls into. And of course it's Arjuna that's speaking now in this part of the Bhagavatam. Sakya means friendship. So one of friendship, there are cross-pollinations between all these relationships. So these are as I say, these are the main categories, but there are cross-pollinations. So you can have in other relationships, Sakya, the friendship relationship may not be prominent, but it can also be there. But when it becomes prominent, then that obviously is the category that you're in. So yeah, Sakya means friend. It's just a relationship of friendship. Vatsalya is a relationship, a parental relationship, where one can have that, just like Mother Yashoda, Nanda Maharaj, etc. They're in the rasa of Vatsalya, but Krishna again is unlimited, so he can expand himself unlimited times. So if you want to have that relationship with Krishna, that's also available to have that relationship based on the parental relationship and parental love. And then the last one is Madhurya, which is on the basis of love, actually, as a lover, a conjugal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So all of these different broad categories are there, and then subcategories within them. And they're available to all of us, depending on the service we render to Krishna, depending on the desire we have, and the relationship that we're seeking, and all of that. So today, as we say, we're talking, is focusing on Arjuna, and he has that relationship of Sakya, of friendship with Krishna. But in essence, this whole section of the Bhagavatam, Pandavas retire timely, and then they're reflecting on their relationship with Krishna. The whole kind of nature of this section underscores Krishna's role as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because one, they're greatly lamenting Krishna's departure, but they're also reflecting on all the incredible things Krishna did. So Arjuna's talking here about, I wouldn't have been able to get down off my horse on the battlefield to find water, to give water to my horses, etc., if it wasn't for Krishna. So there's all these references to how Krishna was their protector like that. So these references are throughout the Vedic scriptures, emphasizing and underscoring Krishna's role as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. aham savasya prabhuvo mata savam pravartate iti madva bhajante mam buddha-bhava samamrita. That Kṛṣṇa is the source of all spiritual and material worlds, and everything is emanating from Kṛṣṇa. Everything emanates from Kṛṣṇa. There's nothing that doesn't come from Kṛṣṇa directly. And then, of course, once it directly emanates from Kṛṣṇa, then there are so many other factors that come into play. But ultimately, everything is emanating from Kṛṣṇa. And the wise, who know this, the wise who know this, who are aware of this, they perfectly engage in Kṛṣṇa's devotional service with all their hearts. Actually, the verse, that's from the Bhagavad Gita, the verse before that, Etam Vibhutam Yogam Cha, is making the same point. That if you understand the nature of Kṛṣṇa and who Kṛṣṇa is, everything is emanating from him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, creator and maintainer of everything, etc., etc., then naturally, if you fully realize that, you're going to engage in that person's direct service, because we can't do that. You know, nothing is emanating from us. We've created nothing. We maintain nothing in that sense. Outside of our own kind of, you know, little world, you know, there's an element of maintenance that takes place, but just in terms of, you know, the universal creation, we have no role in that whatsoever. So if we understand Kṛṣṇa's role in all of that, then naturally it's just automatic that we're going to engage in that person's service, just simply because it's just mind-boggling that you can have a person who has all those potencies, etc. Then you have, you know, Bhaktaramya Gitapa Sham Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Surira Sarvabhutanam Yatva Mam Shantimujati. That Kṛṣṇa, a person in full consciousness of Kṛṣṇa, knowing Kṛṣṇa to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and all austerities, and the supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, indeed. A person who's in full consciousness of that and knows that, and Kṛṣṇa also that Kṛṣṇa is the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, will then engage in devotional service, and then as a result of engaging in that devotional service, they will attain peace, as that verse says. They'll attain peace from the pangs of material misery. We've talked about the pangs of material misery before. Again, main categories are birth, old age, disease and death, these material pangs that we can't change, and then some subsidiary ones, the three subsidiary ones, Adhyatmic, Adhibhautic, Adhidaivic. Adhidaivic, the ones that are inflicted on us by nature, ultimately in that sense by the demigods, but by nature. And we see at the moment with the whole climate change issue, so many natural phenomena and natural disasters like that. Nobody wants them. They're totally unwanted, but they come. So that's Adhidaivic. Adhibhautic, suffering from other living beings, other living creatures. So people, animals, etc., you know, can attack us and cause us misery and pain. Not that we want it, but it comes anyway. And then arguably the worst of all is Adhyatmic, or suffering that comes from ourselves, and particularly from our own minds. And again, we see that in the material world. So many, and as Kali Yuga progresses, the amount of people who are suffering from mental health issues and all of that kind of thing just is ever increasing. Again, it's unwanted, we don't want it, but it comes of its own sweet will. But we can be freed from all those pangs of material existence by devotional service, engaging in service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then Lord Brahma himself, who is the direct creator of the material world, obviously the indirect creator is Kṛṣṇa, but Lord Brahma, in service to Kṛṣṇa, creates this material world. So Lord Brahma himself says in his own words, Ishvara Parama Kṛṣṇa Satchitananda Vigraha Anadir Adi Govinda Sarva Karanam. That Kṛṣṇa, who is known as Govinda, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful spiritual body. He's the origin of all, and he has no other origin. There's no origin for Kṛṣṇa. Kṛṣṇa's ever existing. So he's the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. So Krishna's the prime cause. He's the noumena behind the phenomena of creation. He's the noumena behind it. So he's the prime cause. But then you have other people assisting Krishna in his services, such as Lord Brahma, in directly creating this material world. And then also from Śrimad-Bhagavatam, Ete chamsa kala pumsa Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. This is the conclusion of all Vedic literature, all the lists of all the incarnations of Godhead are but plenary portions, parts, plenary expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Everything is emanating from him. So as we, the whole idea is that we try to figure out, with the help of Shastra, of course, try to dig deep and get behind the externals and the veil of what's going on, and really trying to understand what's actually going on. And that is that everything, not a blade of grass moves, was another nice phrase that Srila Prabhupada often used. Not a blade of grass moves without the sanction of the Supreme. So everything, not even a blade of grass can move without Krishna's sanction like that. So for us, the idea is to dive deep into the understanding of all of this, and then come the conclusion then being, as I said in that verse from Bhagavad Gita 10.7, Etam Bhutam Yogam Cha, that once you understand that and realize that, that then the automatic conclusion is that you're going to engage in devotional service to this incredible personality called Sri Krishna. And then once you do that, you'll be freed from all anxiety, all miseries, all suffering. Just will no longer exist like that. So, that's why Krishna comes time and time again, and again in unlimited incarnations, simply coming to give it in all of his various different incarnations and forms, to give us an opportunity to realize who he is, and then engage in his service like that. And as we've spoken many times, the most recent way that Krishna has come is in the form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya, and has made it easier than ever before. There's one nice comment from Srila Prabhupada that Krishna is all merciful, but Lord Chaitanya is even more merciful again. Because when Krishna came, there was a requirement that there was some level of surrender, or some level of commitment, direct commitment that you would make to Krishna in his form as Shyamasundar. But when Lord Chaitanya came, he's so merciful, there's just nothing, there are no conditions, it's totally unconditional. And simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And even if we chant it with offences, that's okay. We are still chanting Hare Krishna, we're still considered, Prabhupada uses the phrase somewhere, semi-Vaishnavas. So we're half Vaishnavas, we're not full, because full Vaishnavas would chant offencelessly without any offences whatsoever. But Lord Chaitanya is so merciful, we can even be chanting with offences, we will still advance in Krishna consciousness. We're semi-Vaishnavas and will eventually become full Vaishnavas. And then on the point about impersonalism, some of the arguably the most prominent of all impersonalists that we know of is Sankaracharya. Sankaracharya, of course, is an incarnation of Lord Shiva, and in the bigger picture of his purpose of coming actually was to gradually shift people from the voidistic view of the world that came from Lord Buddha, and to start shifting people back towards a more theistic view, at least to accept the Vedas, because Lord Buddha had gotten everybody to reject the Vedas because they were using the Vedas as a justification for killing animals and eating the flesh of animals. So Lord Buddha could see they were using the Vedas because that won't get into the details of that, but you can extract things from the Vedas that could in a superficial sense justify people killing and eating animals. So Lord Buddha wanted people to be to stop that practice, that violent practice that was producing unlimited karma for all the citizens. But because they were so attached to the Vedas, and there are some provisions in the Vedas, the way to do that, for him to achieve that, was to get them to reject the Vedas. And then he was successful in his mission, and people did give up the slaughter of animals. But of course, the ultimate conclusion of life is not just to be a vegetarian. That's a very, very minor part of it. So then Sankaracharya came to start the process of people accepting the Vedas again. But his message was an impersonal message. He didn't want to give them the whole thing in one. So the first step was to accept the Vedas, but from an impersonalistic point of view. But it's Sankaracharya himself who, when leaving this world, his famous poem, Bhajam Govinda, Bhajam Govinda, Bhajam Govinda, stating that there is, Kṛṣṇa is a person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda. He's the protector of the cows and the giver of pleasure to the senses, like that. So, yeah, it's just interesting that actually there's one nice poem which I have in front of me, which I will read actually, and this is Sankaracharya's poem, talking about the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And he says, of that terrifying river of the battlefield of Kurukshetra, over which the Pandavas victoriously crossed, Bhīṣma and Droṇa were like high banks, Jayadratha like the river's water, the king of Gandhara, the blue water lily, Śalya the shark, Kripa the current, Kṛṣṇa the mighty wave, Ashvatam and Vikarna, the dread alligators, and Duryodhan, the very whirlpool. But thou, O Kṛṣṇa, was the ferryman. May the spotless lotus of the Mahabharata, which grows on the waters of the words of Vyasa, and of which the Bhagavad Gita is the irresistible sweet fragrance, and its tales of heroes, the full-blown petals, fully opened by the talk of Lord Hari, who destroys the sins of Kali Yuga, and on which daily light the nectar-seeking souls, like so many bees, swarming joyously, may this lotus of the Mahabharata bestow on us the highest good. Salutations to Lord Kṛṣṇa, the embodiment of supreme bliss, by whose grace and compassion the dumb can become eloquent and the lame scale the mountains. To him I salute. Doesn't sound like the words of an impersonalist like that. So even though we may have some attraction, in one sense impersonal philosophy by definition means there's no personal relationships. And of course personal relationships, particularly as we experience them here in the material world, they can cause stress and strain and difficulty and challenges for us. So from that point of view, you can understand why some people would shy away from personal relationships, become hermits, etc. But of course, whatever the personal relationships are here in the material world, that isn't what they are in the spiritual world. And basically speaking, they have all the bliss and sweetness and all the things that we crave and relish in a personal relationship, but free from the stresses and strains and anxieties and disappointments and all of that. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You throw the bathwater out, it's dirty, but you keep the baby. So yes, we can throw out the dirty water of, and water is quite a theme. It was quite a theme in Sankaracharya's poem, and it's a theme today, that we can throw out the dirty water, which are the negative aspects of personal relationships in the material world, but we should keep the baby of seeking those perfectly pure relationships. Prabhupada gives the example that the closest thing to love in the material world, as we will experience in the spiritual world, the closest thing to it in the material world is the love that a mother has for a child, because it's unconditional. And we can see in that relationship, at least in the early years, it may change when they become teenagers, but at least in the early years, the mother really doesn't give, there may be exceptions, but in general the mother really almost doesn't notice or experience any of the downsides of that relationship, because the love is so unconditional. So that's what we're striving for, to keep the baby of perfect relationships that exist in the spiritual world, and to throw out the dirty water of the negatives of those relationships as they manifest here in the material world. So yeah, so as I say, it's these sections that we're reading are really reflecting on or underscoring Krishna's position. And if we understand that position properly and connect with Kṛṣṇa on that platform, then that's how our lives will become perfect and full of bliss, etc. And then the point made here is in the warfield scarcity, or the point about the water in the warfield. So the little story to that, or the little pastime to that, is, the horses needed water, and as Prabhupada says, on a battlefield, sometimes water can be scarce. So the horses needed to be watered, fed and watered. So Arjuna got down off the chariot, and once you do that on a battlefield, you're in a very, very vulnerable situation, because now suddenly you're on just your own 2 feet, as opposed to the kind of protection that a chariot and horses kind of provide you, particularly if your enemy, your foe, has all of that, has the protection of a chariot and the protection of horses, etc., speed of horses, all of those things. So immediately you step down, you become very vulnerable. You can just imagine that you're surrounded by people all higher up than you, because you're now down on the ground and they're sitting on a chariot or sitting on horses, or whatever the case may be. And what Arjuna did was he took out his bow and arrow, his Gandiva bow, and he fired his arrow directly into the ground, boring right down. And as Prabhupada says in the purple, that is in essence how water is really obtained. It's through wells being bored into the ground like that and extract the water out. But Arjuna did it with his bow and arrow, like that. But he's just making the point that he couldn't have done that and been in that vulnerable situation to do that without the protection of Kṛṣṇa. Yatra Yogeshvara Krishna, that wherever Kṛṣṇa is, there will always be extraordinary opulence, power, victory, etc. All wonderful things come from our connection to Kṛṣṇa. Kṛṣṇa can never be defeated. So therefore, if we're connected to Kṛṣṇa, we can never be defeated. And of course, Duryodhana, the arch foe, the arch enemy of Kṛṣṇa, if you like, he was aware of this. And of course, he was getting advice from different personalities, and of course Sanjay was advising his father, Dhritarashtra, and Sanjay could see this. He knew who Kṛṣṇa was and could see, basically could see what was going to happen. And Duryodhana was going from, on one side looking at everyone that was on his side of the war, if you like, in his army, these incredible personalities who Sankaracharya mentions in this poem. So Duryodhana on the one hand is looking at all of them and thinking, how can I be defeated? It's impossible. But then there's still this thing in his mind. He's looking at Kṛṣṇa. Who is this guy Kṛṣṇa? And he's, he's flitting, he's oscillating, between kind of understanding to enough of a degree who Kṛṣṇa is to totally freak him out, but also then trying to, convince himself that, no, this guy, he's no big deal like that. So he would be oscillating between the two. But yeah, Yogeshvara, Kṛṣṇa, that wherever we have Kṛṣṇa, there will always be everything auspicious. And Arjuna knew that. And now that Kṛṣṇa has left, there's lamentation and all of these kind of things. But it is also an opportunity for Arjuna, the Pandavas, and all God-conscious, Kṛṣṇa-conscious personalities at that time to actually reflect on that loss and reflect on who Kṛṣṇa really was, and that's what's going on in these particular verses. And that's what the message then for us is, that we should also try to reflect in that way, also understand Kṛṣṇa's position, who Kṛṣṇa actually is, and once we make progress on that understanding, on our understanding of who Kṛṣṇa is, based on what the reality is, not some concocted or imaginary understanding, but based on what's spoken in Srimad-Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, etc. Then once we understand who Kṛṣṇa is, then it just becomes so natural and normal for us to then engage in Krishna's service. Like we've said before, you know, in the material world, you have prominent sports people, or music people, or even politicians, or whatever it may be, royalty, whatever. And because they're doing something maybe a little bit above the norm, and are, you know, to some degree seen as a little exceptional, and to some degree rightly so, because they have certain skills and talents that put them in that position. It's kind of natural then for people to look to them and to admire them, to appreciate them, and even engage in serving them, actually. So how much more natural that is for the person who everything is emanated from, including these personalities, you know, whoever they might be. How normal, natural, automatic is it for us to then engage in the service of that person from whom everything is emanating? And then once we engage in, start that process of engaging in Krishna's service and engaging in devotional service, then our lives they're on a fast track to everything that is perfect, auspicious and glorious. Okay, thank you all very much. I don't like to go on more than 45 minutes. I know you all have very, very busy days. 45 minutes is probably a lot of time to take from your day. So thank you very much for tuning in. And I guess I'll be back, Kṛṣṇa willing, next week with the Śrimad-Bhagavatam class again. But for now, thank you all very much, and I wish you a very blissful week in the service of Srila Prabhupada and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. Hare Krishna.